Chapter 14. When the Reverend Father took refuge in his chamber after this fearful and memorable interview, he felt a strange, mysterious sensation of something dreadful hanging over him, though he scarcely knew what, which so often weighs upon the mind when any great and unexpected change has taken place in our destiny. He threw himself upon a sofa and endeavored in vain to analyze his feelings. He was not superstitious, but there was something about the mummy that inspired him with awe in spite of himself, and he felt he was no longer his own master, for a supernatural power seemed to mingle with his designs and control his actions. He endeavored in vain to recur the plans he had that morning arranged for gaining over partisans to the side of Rosabella. He could not govern his ideas. He could no longer direct them as he wished. One sole thought occupied his mind. One sole image floated before his senses. He held his head in his hands, and he pressed them firmly against his ears, and closed his eyes as though by shutting out external objects his mind could recover its tone. It was all in vain. The gaunt figure of the mummy still seemed to stalk before his eyes, and his fiendish laugh still ring in his ears. Father Morris rose from his couch and threw open his window, the cool evening breeze reviving him and restoring his faculties. He now began to reason with himself. "It is very strange," he said, "but unaccountable though it may seem, the destinies of this fearful being are evidently interwoven with mine. His appearance here at this eventful moment, and his forcing himself upon my confidence with a secret power superior to my own, prevented the possibility of my refusing him, cannot surely be accidental. No, no, he is permitted to revisit the earth for some positive and definite purpose, perchance to counteract my plans, perchance to aid them. There is no vanity in the thought, for upon my destiny at this moment hangs that of a mighty empire, and I feel that I am but a blind instrument in the hands of fate, condemned to work, mole-like, in the dark, uncertain whether might be drawing destruction upon my head at this very moment, when I fancy I am attaining the pinnacle of my happiness and glory. However, I will not be wanting to myself. This strange agent may be sent to aid me, and it shall not be my fault if I do not avail myself of its assistance. In this present garb he treats disgust and terror, but clothed as a human being, his superhuman eloquence and his strange, fearful interest, excited by his looks and manner, might render him a powerful assistant. It shall be my present business, then, to endeavor to make him serviceable to my views, and to do this I must persuade him to adopt the dress and manners of the country." Pleased with the resolutions he had taken, and quite forgetting the lateness of the hour, Father Morris ascended hastily to the usual sitting-room of Mrs. Montague, but what was his horror on encountering it to find, instead of the usual cheerful party he expected, only the dreaded mummy. Cheops lay stretched upon the couch he had before occupied, his eyes fixed upon the brilliant constellation of Orion, and his lips murmuring an address to the deity he fancied it to represent. "Yes, blessed Horus," cried Cheops, as Father Morris entered the room, "thou wilt hear my prayer, for thou hast also been a stranger in a foreign land, forced even in thy mother's arms to fly, pursued by all the fury of fell Typhon's rage. Thou knowest how I pity the unhappy, and thou too, bright Isis," continued he, addressing the moon. "Thou also hast known sorrow, when thy streaming tears occasioned the first overflowing of the Nile, and grief for the loss of Osiris rent thy bosom with despair. Then becamest thou well fitted to the patroness of the wretched. O Arsinoe, could I but recall that fateful moment when I saw thee last." "Despair is sinful," said Father Morris, who now stood beside him. "Repentance may obtain forgiveness even of the most heinous crimes." Cheops started upon his feet at the sound of the father's voice, and burst into one of his fearful laughs. "And who art thou?" he cried. Who presumest to preach repentance to me? Oh, I know thee now. Thou art the priest whose confidence I have become. But though I will aid thee, think not I will be thy slave. No, rather art thou mine, for thou art in my power. Father Morris felt his blood curdle in his veins at this address, and though he strove to speak, his tongue clove to the roof of his mouth and would not articulate a word. Cheops saw his embarrassment and continued in a milder tone. Fear nothing. We may be useful to each other. I would fain quit these garments of the tomb, and since I seem destined to remain some time amongst your fellow men, I will endeavor to assume their manners. You seem to have influence among them. Try, then, to pacify their fears, and teach them to regard me as a fellow being. At this moment, the solemn clang of a deep-toned bell fell heavily upon their ears. Cheops started at the sound, and springing up from the couch on which he had reclined, bent forward eagerly to listen to it slowly peal into the deep silence of the night. It was a great bell at the ancient cathedral of St. Paul, which tolled to announce that on the following day the body of the deceased queen would lie in state. "What is it?" cried Cheops. "Whence comes that fearful knell, awful as a sound which is doomed to sink into the souls of the initiate of the Isian mysteries? Again it tolls. Speak! Whence comes it? What does it foretell? Is it the signal of another change of existence, strange, awful, and mysterious as that I have already experienced? Let it come. I am prepared. The gods cannot inflict tortures more horrid than those I already suffer. Cannot, have I said, dead Osiris, forgive the impetuous thought. Methinks even now I see thy dark blue countenance frowning in awful majesty at my unguarded rashness. Forgive me, mighty spirit. No longer will I repine at thy decrees, but teach my proud rebellious heart submission. Alas, alas, had I done before Center. But it is too late now, and happiness is lost to me forever." Sighing, he hid his face in his hands as he spoke, and all again was silent, save for the deep-toned bell, which still fell heavily in intervals upon the ear. Slowly the hours rolled on, yet still Father Morris sat gazing on the mummy, till the first bright tints of morning broke through the dark gray sky, and a half-subdued bustle of the streets, as of people hurrying to and fro, announced the preparation were making to hang them with black. A confused murmur, the busy voices hushed in whispers, and the still continued tolling of the muffled bell harmonized with the fearful form of the mummy's visant, which, now seen dimly by the uncertain shades of the breaking twilight, seemed to acquire fresh horrors from the obscure and wavering gleams thrown upon it. It was at this moment, when objects were gradually becoming more distinct in every instant, that Lord Edmund rushed into the room. "Father Morris," he cried, "you must aid me, or all is lost." And as he spoke, he started back aghast, for the terrific form of the mummy struck upon his sight. He had seen him, it was true, on his first descent, but the events that had since occurred, involving as they did the dearest interests of his soul, had almost driven the circumstance from his memory. Now, however, aided by the elusive light, the spectre appeared before him in all its frightful reality, and even the firm mind of Edmund shrunk back aghast from the appalling sight. "Why do you shrink?" said Cheops, his deep, hollow voice thrilling through the souls of his auditors. "Why does my form appear to create such terror? Is it because a tomb has been my dwelling? O degenerate race, know that the sons of Mizraim, wise and bold, learned they were, held that communication with the dead was needful to the living. They loved to gaze upon the empty caskets, deprived of all that gave it value, for it taught the meaninglessness of the body, and who could dwell upon the withering, worthless clay, and not acknowledge to his soul how poor were its highest pleasures when compared to the sublime aspirations of the spirit. Why then tremble? Virtue need no fear spectres. Vice might shudder at itself. If thine own conscience do not upbraid thee, what hast thou to fear?" "Nothing," said Lord Edmund firmly. Spectre or demon, whatever you may be, I fear you not. 'Twas but the infirmity of human nature. It is past, and I am again myself, and strong in the consciousness of the integrity of my own mind. It is not in the power of hell itself to frighten me from my purpose." "The integrity of thine own mind," cried Cheops, with one of his horrid laughs. "Poor weak offspring of clay! I confide in thy boasted strength, rely upon thy vaunted firmness, but when the hour of trial of temptation shall arrive, tremble." Lord Edmund shuddered in spite of himself, and his blood bled colder in his veins. "Who art thou?" he cried indignantly. "Strange, terrible being that thou art, and why art thou permitted to revisit earth to taunt me into madness?" "I was once as thou art," returned Cheops, "young, ardent, and impetuous. I thought the world was made for happiness, and that men were born to be my slaves. Glory was my idol, and fame only mead I can vent. Deeply did I think of her intoxicating cup, and my renown spread to the remotest corners of the earth, and my power became as boundless as my ambition. To immortalize my name, I caused the erection of an enormous pyramid, and my grandeur seemed beyond the reach of destiny to destroy. But I trusted in my own strength, and I fell. Tremble then, weak man, nor dare to boast how thou wilt act upon the moments of temptation shall arrive." The deep, thrilling voice of the mummy fell upon Lord Edmund's ear as a warning from the tomb. He, too, was relying on his own strength, and should he fall, too? Heaven forbid. "No," thought he, "in some causes I may fear, but now, when the welfare of her I love is at stake, I cannot fail." The mummy smiled as he read the thoughts that passed over Lord Edmund's expressive countenance. "Thus I thought too," murmured he, "and as I was, so will he be deceived. Human nature is still the same, even in the remotest corner of the globe. Fool that I was then to attempt to reverse her decrees. Forgive me, mighty Isis." The rest was lost in inarticulate murmurs as the mummy's head sank upon his heart. "Oh, God!" cried Edmund to Father Morris. "Whence comes this fearful spectre? What does it import?" "I know not," said Father Morris in a hoarse, unnatural whisper, his eyes still strained upon the mummy. Edmund started, for the unusual abstraction of Father Morris added fresh horror to the scene. His senses seemed bewildered. He scarcely knew where he was, or what was passing around him. He rubbed his eyes and tried to wake from what appeared a frightful dream, but in vain. The vision was still there in all its horrible distinctness, and Edmund felt a terrific creeping steal along his nerves as the hollow spectral voice of the mummy again fell upon his ears. "Alas, where am I?" continued he. "Can that river be a ramification of my beloved Nile, or am I indeed torn from all I prize and love, to be cast upon this secluded spot where all seems strange and insignificant? O deity of the foaming waters, holy Sirius, hear me! Calm my troubled spirit and grant some gracious manifestation of thy divinity to chase my growing doubts. But I deceive myself. This is not the Nile. No papyrine boats glide over its polished surface. No acanthus groves nor forests of lofty palm border its banks. No, no, the immortal palm, fit emblem of the soul, grows only in those favored realms where, spurning it oppression, it resists the feeble efforts of man to bend it to the earth, and springs upward with only added vigor from the feeble attempts made to subdue it." The mummy ceased, and a solemn silence prevailed, while his passion, fierce as the whirlwind's fury, flitted across his face, chilling the beholder's heart with horror at the fearful being whose bosom could conceive them. Father Morris was not naturally timid. He even possessed an uncommon strength both of nerves and mind. Yet an unwonted shuddering ran through his frame as he gazed upon Cheops, and traced the workings of the demonic mind as they were successfully imprinted on his features. Involuntarily he turned away in disgust. "For God's sake, let us go!" cried he, gasping for breath, for a strange feeling that he could not define seemed to impede his respiration. Yes, let us go," stammered forth Edmund, still, however, keeping his eyes fixed upon the awful object of his fear, as he slowly moved towards the door. "Stay!" cried Cheops in a voice of thunder. Involuntarily they obeyed. "How feeble is this race of men," resumed the mummy. "How different from the sons of ancient Miserium, and of the microbian Ethiopians, or even the phallic foes, degenerate in form as well as spirit. Their souls no longer seem emanations from the divinity, though perhaps the immortal spark becomes degraded and abased from its long continuance in clay, and is sunk forever from its pristine greatness. Stay, then," continued he. "Why should you flee me? I mean you no harm. I swear by the sacred tomb of Osiris the Flay, I will not hurt you. Drive me then from amongst you, and I may aid your projects. At least it is your duty to receive me as the destined instrument of fate, since Osiris decrees that my soul shall quit its transmigration to the form of animals to reanimate this worthless body. Take me then to your councils, confide in me power, and I swear by the holy dust of Isis that you shall not repent." "Avaunt, demon!" cried Lord Edmund, and bursting from the room, he rushed out of the house. What further passed between the priest and his awful visitor was known only to themselves, for when the family descended to breakfast, the mummy was gone, and Father Morris appeared absorbed in his usual studies, without taking the slightest notice of the terrific occurrences of the night. The death of the queen now being generally known, her remains, laid in state, were exposed to the lamentations of her subjects, and the family of Mrs. Montague were amongst the earliest visitors of the morning spectacle. In an immense hall, hung with black, was a kind of a bier, covered with black cloth, supporting the body of the deceased queen, over which was thrown a velvet pall, so disposed, however, as to display the beautiful features of the deceased, which, though now fixed in death, still remained their native expression of majestic dignity. Immense tapers of enormous thickness lighted the sombre halls, hung with black cloth, while the cloister boys walked up and down chanting hymns in honor of the deceased, and flinging incense in the air from silver vessels suspended by silver chains, which they carried in their hands, thus shedding fragrance round and chasing the fearful odor of mortality even from the very chamber of death. Priests wrapped in funeral garments also slowly paraded the room, muttering prayers and joining occasionally their full, deep-toned voices with the shriller chant of the boys. The space where the public were admitted was railed off from the lower end of the hall, but near the body knelt a beautiful female arrayed in black velvet, and her fair face and arms shaded by a veil of black crape. "Oh, Osiris!" cried a figure wrapped in a long dark cloak, grasping the arm of Father Morris. "Who is that lovely creature? There, bending over the last awful relics of mortality. Methinks she looks beauteous as the phoenix rising from a funeral pyre, and triumphing in glory over the impotent malice of the grave." "Hush, for heaven's sake," whispered a deep, full voice of Father Morris. "It's Elvira, the rival of Rosabella, whom you have sworn to support." "Typhon himself could not injure her," said Cheops, for it was he who stood with his eyes fixed upon her, apparently lost in meditation. "For mercy's sake, let us go on," whispered the priest. "You will excite attention. We shall be discovered. Besides," continued he in a lower tone, did you find a crown so delightful that you think you would injure her by depriving her of one?" "No, by the holy limbs of Osiris," said Cheops, and obeying the influence of the friar's arm, he moved onwards. "Why was not Rosabella with Elvira in the hall?" asked Sir Ambrose. "I thought it was commanded by law that all the princesses of the royal blood should exhibit themselves publicly as mourners by the corpse of the deceased queen." "Rosabella is ill," replied the Duke. "Grief for the loss of her cousin has produced an excess of fever, and she is unable to quit her bed." "Indeed," returned Sir Ambrose incredulously. "It is very strange. I own I did not give Rosabella credit for so much sensibility." Notwithstanding the incredulity of Sir Ambrose, however, Rosabella was dangerously ill, though her illness did not proceed exactly from the cause she chose to assign it. The terror she had felt from the sudden appearance of a mummy, whom she thought a supernatural being, at the very moment she believed the death of her cousin was darkly hinted at by the monk, operated upon an overexcited imagination and had produced a fever, and for some days Rosabella was in considerable danger. The secret exertions of Father Morris, however, in her behalf, prevented Rosabella's cause from being injured by her illness, and by the time she was able to leave her bed, Lord Gustavus de Montfort, Lord Maysworth, and Dr. Hardman, with the Lords Noodle and Doodle, had declared themselves her adherents, bringing with them all the numerous hosts who, finding it too much trouble to judge for themselves, are always ready to follow in the train of a great man. The day when this important declaration was made was that on which all the nobility of the realm assembled in that splendid monument of antiquity, Westminster Hall, to choose the Council of States to govern the kingdom during the interim. This vulnerable pile, which had seen so many generations successfully rise and pass away, now cleared of the encumbrances with which the bad taste of the Middle Ages had loaded it, shone in all its original magnificence. It opened wide its ponderous portals to receive the whole nobility of England upon this important occasion. It was a glorious and almost an awful sight to see so many great and illustrious characters, some of whose names were celebrated even to the remotest corners of the globe, collected together in that magnificent hall. Few, however, thought of the grandeur of the spectacle, the deep interest excited by the occasion that assembled them, absorbing all minor feelings. The business of the day was soon entered upon, and 12 noble individuals chosen to direct the affairs of state, till another queen should be elected. The Duke of Cornwall, Lord Edmund Montague, Lord Gustavus de Montfort, Lord Maysworth, and the Lords Noodle and Doodle were amongst the number chosen, and as soon as the election was completed, the council retired together to an apartment appropriated for their use to consult upon the measures to be taken to secure a due election of their future queen. Then it was that the anxious father Elvira was paralyzed to hear the noble lords above mentioned declare themselves partisans of her rival, and to see others who had till then remained neutral seem inclined to range themselves upon either side. In vain did Edmund exert his powerful eloquence. The weight and influence of his adverse lords far outweighed his arguments in the breasts of the auditions, and the poor old Duke returned home depressed and almost heartbroken from the conviction he received that the feeling of the majority of the council was decidedly against his child. The moment the Duke reached his own palace, he repaired to the apartment of Rosabella, and found her apparently in a state of convalescence, reclining upon the sofa, supported by her confident Marianne, with Father Morris sitting at her feet. The Holy Father was evidently confused at the unexpected arrival of the Duke, and he rose hastily in great disorder to endeavor to account for his appearance there. The Duke, however, was much too enraged to listen to him, or indeed to notice the suspicious circumstance of his secretly visiting the princess. His passion was solely directed at Rosabella, and not even her present feeble and emaciated appearance was sufficient to disarm his anger. "Wretch!" he declared, "vile ungrateful wretch that thou art, thou hast destroyed me, that will bring the grey hairs of thy benefactor with sorrow to the grave, and so treacherous too! O Rosabella, how could you plot against me whilst you were enjoying the shelter of my roof? Against me, did I say? Alas, to only be against me, but no, with fiend-like barbarity you have conspired to destroy my child." The Duke had there unwittingly struck a chord that thrilled to the inmost souls of his auditors. He did not heed their confusion, however, and went on. "Oh, Rosabella, if I could have guessed when thou wert brought to me a little smiling infant, and I took thee under my protection to foster thee as my own child, that thou wouldst prove a serpent to sting my heart to the core. But I was told it would be so. Sir Ambrose warned me to beware. Your brother, said he, has proved a villain, and the violence of his passions has led him to commit unheard-of crimes. It may not be the same furies grow in the bosom of a smiling infant. Do not desert her, but do not educate the offspring of guilt in the bosom of your own family." "Did Sir Ambrose say anything else?" exclaimed Father Morris, grinding his teeth together and scarcely able to articulate from the strength of the emotion that convulsed his frame. The Duke, however, did not hear his question, and passionately continued. "He advised me well, but I was deaf to his counsel. Fate hurried me on to my own destruction, and I nourished with the tenderest care a wretch whom I have this day discovered plotting this traitorous to deprive my daughter of her birthright." "What do you mean, my lord?" said Rosabella. "I do not understand you." Yes, yes, replied the Duke. Ask what I mean. You may well assume that face of smiling innocence, too. Too often it served your purpose. Fool, idiot that I have been, to have been so easily deceived. But your arts will be in vain now. Lord Gustavus de Montfort could not have openly declared himself your friend, as he did today, if the most insidious arts had not been practised to win him. And has he done so? Asked Rosabella, with her eyes sparkling with joy. Has he done so? Repeated the Duke bitterly. No doubt you know it but too well. Also that the proposing Lord Maysworth and the enlisted Lord Noodle and the intelligent Lord Doodle have enlisted their empty heads and long purses to your side. Have they? Cried Rosabella, transport brightening every feature. Oh, Rosabella! Exclaimed the Duke, passion giving way to agony, and the torrents of tears streaming down his aged face. That look of affected astonishment is intolerable. You must have known all this. I'm a poor, weak old man. There needed not be such plotting to deceive me. It breaks my heart to find you guilty of hypocrisy. Rosabella was affected by her uncle's tears. All her former kindness rushed upon her mind, and nature resuming her powerful influence, she forgot all her ambitious projects, her hopes, her fears, her intrigues. She thought only of the feeble, miserable old man before her, and attempting to throw her arms round his neck, she sought to mingle her tears with his, and clinging to his feet, implored his forgiveness. The Duke, however, could not read her heart, and blinded by passion, saw this action as an aggravated insult. Violently he spurned her from doing, and commanding her to leave his house immediately, and by so doing, extinguished forever every gentler feeling in his niece's breast. Rosabella's haughty spirit did not wait for a second repulse. Her tears were instantly dried, and with her eyes flashing fire and cheeks glowing with indignation, she rushed out of the room without deigning to reply. The Duke's rage, if possible, exceeded her own, and these near relations, united as they were by the tenderest ties, parted in mutual hatred, sincerely hoping on both sides that they might never meet again. Father Morris and Marianne followed Rosabella, and they found, as they expected, that the violent overexcitement of the moment had given way to hysterics. These tremendous convulsive agonies soon exhausted her feeble frame, and she lay upon the sofa in a state of torpid languor, nearly approaching to insensibility, whilst her friends consulted upon what course they should pursue. During this pause of uncertainty and painful deliberation, for as Rosabella was entirely dependent upon her uncle, the case seemed hopeless, a letter arrived from Lord Gustavus de Montfort offering to loan of his palace and his purse to the princess. That prudent and calculating nobleman was fully aware of the situation in which Rosabella would be thrown in by his declaration in her favor, and of the advantage that would accrue to himself in after times, if she should obtain the crown, from his having at such a moment conferred an important service upon his future sovereign. Father Morris did not hesitate to open the letter and read it. Rosabella was not in a state to be consulted. Indeed, the case was one that did not admit of hesitation, and a conveyance having been procured, the princess was removed from the house of Lord Gustavus before she had recovered full use of her faculties.